on this Saturday night, going face to face. Canada's Indigenous Services Minister meets with the Mohawk Nation.
We're a nation of people that have stopped talking to each other.
The push to end the blockades as new protests pop up. COVID-19 quarantine. How Washington will help hundreds of Americans trapped on a cruise ship. Will Ottawa follow suit? Deadly storm. The brutal weather battering the UK. And hashtag, how to go viral and get votes.
They know they can reach potential voters.
One presidential candidate's campaign to win the White House.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. More protests in support of BC's Wet'suwet'en Nation are popping up across Canada. In Ontario, an ongoing demonstration has caused operations at the country's largest freight rail carrier, CN Railway, to grind to a halt. The company has suspended its network east of Toronto for the foreseeable future. Today, Canada's Indigenous Services Minister came face to face with protesters in the hopes of ending the blockade. Kamil Karamali has our top story tonight.
Thank you.
This meeting between Canada's Indigenous Services Minister and the Mohawk First Nation is crucial to get the country back to business.
This is a situation that's very tense, very volatile.
After days of a cross-country shutdown of Canada's rail lines, Marc Miller stepped in to try to put an end to the blockade in eastern Ontario.
All of Canada is hurting. The economy is slowing down. Everyone knows the reports about supply shortages.
It's been 10 days since the protests began in Belleville, Ontario, a major hub that connects Canada's capital to Montreal and Toronto. It's a key artery for transporting goods and travelers, but that's all come to a standstill. Via Rail says it's had to cancel nearly 300 trains, affecting more than 60,000 passengers. Solidarity! There have been protests right across the country. In Vaughan, north of Toronto, hundreds of people are blocking rail lines.
People are wanting to stay as long as possible until the government does something about what's happening.
The protesters are supporting the Wet'suwet'en elders in northern BC who oppose a liquefied natural gas pipeline that would cross their traditional territory. As for the meeting, it was held behind closed doors with little information coming out. Those who did witness it stormed out before it was done.
It really felt like it wasn't genuine. It was a runaround. It was almost insulting.
But even going into the meeting, the minister couldn't predict what would happen.
I can't guarantee what the outcome will be. It isn't mine to judge.
That's a sign the blockade isn't ending and the trains won't be running anytime soon.
Kamil, what's the Mohawk Nation asking for?
Robin, the blockade here is to show support for the Wet'suwet'en First Nation, but it's also for the Mohawk First Nation here to ask for some things for themselves, including better resources, better treatment, and cleaner water. Now, a resolution may not take place until another meeting happens. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett and BC's Indigenous Relations Minister have agreed to meet with the Wet'suwet'en First Nation hereditary chiefs, but no date has been set as of yet. Robin?
Kamil Karamali in Belleville, Ontario. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's former Justice Minister is weighing in on the blockades. Jody Wilson-Raybould is a lawyer and was elected Regional Chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations. For her take, let's go to our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes?
Robin, Jody Wilson-Raybould has always taken a hard line on rule of law, but she's also criticized the government for not doing enough on reconciliation. So I asked her what she thinks about this situation. You were the Attorney General, and at that time, you were adamant about the importance of the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. In this particular case, we seem to be seeing the rule of law coming into conflict with the need for reconciliation. How do you balance those two things?
Well, I mean, as you said, I was the Attorney General. I believe fundamentally in the importance of the rule of law and upholding the rule of law. It is our responsibility to do so as a country. But when it comes to Indigenous peoples historically in this country who have been discriminated against, who have a long shadow of a colonial legacy and a history of the rule of law not being upheld, it's worth worth discussion. It's worth understanding that legacy of colonialism and understanding that the law has not been fairly applied when it comes to Indigenous peoples. And that speaks to the fundamental need for reconciliation, for understanding. And that is going to require all of us as a country to ensure that the rule of law is upheld and that the issues of Indigenous reconciliation and nation rebuilding, self-determination are addressed in a fundamental and transformative way.
I also talked to Ms. Wilson-Raybould about whether the police can be ordered to act by politicians to remove protesters and whether violence could be ahead, plus what she thinks the Prime Minister needs to do. I'll give you a hint. She thinks he needs to take much more leadership on this file. Robin?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. And you can watch the full interview with Jody Wilson-Raybould tomorrow on the West Block, right here on Global. The Prime Minister is taking heat tonight for the way he conducted himself at a meeting with Iran's foreign minister. It comes more than a month after Iran shot down that Ukrainian jetliner, killing 176 people, including 57 Canadians. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken shows us that the encounter is causing controversy as Iran appears ready to give up the plane's black boxes.
Ever since the January 3rd crash, Iran has resisted calls to send Flight 752's flight recorders, the so-called black boxes, abroad to a country that has the expertise to analyze their data. That analysis is vital for the complete investigation Canada and its allies have been demanding. But now, Iran appears ready to send those black boxes to the experts.
I think we have moved from the why to the how. And I think the how, we have a way forward.
That said, the where, the when, and by whom those boxes will be analyzed is still a subject for negotiation.
The Iranian authority have been contacting the French authorities to discuss about terms of reference under which the black box could be transferred and under which conditions they would be transferred in order for the black box to be read in the presence of a number of accredited air safety specialists from different countries, including Canada and Ukraine.
But that good news from Champaign on Saturday is being overshadowed by sharp criticism of a brief meeting Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had Friday at the Munich Security Conference with Iran Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. This video was photographed by one of Zarif's aides and was posted online by the government of Iran. Conservative leadership hopeful Peter MacKay took to Twitter to say, PM's pandering has hit a new low, while Canadian academic Besma Momani, a respected Middle East scholar, noted, not a good look to see Trudeau with smiling Foreign Minister Zarif after Canadians killed at the hands of Iranian incompetence and malice. Trudeau, though, defended his decision to meet Zarif.
I made a promise to families in Canada to do everything I could to make sure that they get answers, that we have a full and complete investigation, that we understand exactly what happened.
In the meantime, Trudeau is expected to propose, perhaps as soon as this week, new international aviation security rules to restrict travel near or over conflict zones. Robin?
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thanks, David. COVID-19 has claimed its first victim outside of Asia, a tourist from China's Hubei province. That man is among the more than 1,600 people who have now died globally from the virus. And the number of cases is still climbing tonight. More than 69,000 have been reported worldwide, the vast majority in China. Dozens of those new cases, including 3 Canadians, are on the Diamond Princess, that cruise ship under quarantine in Japan. So far, 15 Canadians on the ship have become infected with the virus. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is about to repatriate more than 400 Americans stuck on that ship. Jennifer Johnson looks at whether Canada plans to do the same.
Europe has now recorded its first death of COVID-19, an 80-year-old Chinese tourist from Hubei province, where the disease first emerged in December. The man died in France. That brings to 4 deaths from the virus outside of China, the others in Japan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. The head of the World Health Organization says the crisis is evidence the world was badly prepared for this type of pandemic.
We must use the window of opportunity we have to intensify our preparedness. China has bought the world time. We don't know how much time.
Chinese leaders announcing that Wuhan, the city at the epicenter of the virus outbreak, will create more field hospitals. 2 new large hospitals and 9 temporary ones have already been built. And now some good news for passengers stranded aboard a quarantine cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, in Japan. The U.S. will start bringing its citizens home Sunday, but they face another 2-week quarantine in America. Canadian public health officials are assessing how to get their citizens out and what happens next for the Canadians who have tested positive for the virus, including Bernard and Diane Mernard from Quebec.
Say hi.
Some evacuees are troubled. They have to leave behind travel companions who are infected.
We're actually sad because we're leaving Jerry, her name's Jerry too, Jerry alone in Japan without anyone. So we have very much mixed feelings.
Relief, though, for over 2,000 passengers aboard a Holland American cruise ship finally allowed to dock in Cambodia and disembark after spending 2 weeks at sea. The ship had been turned away by 5 other countries. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, officials are trying to retrace a vacationer's steps after he returned to his home in Japan and tested positive for COVID-19. The man stayed at a Hilton timeshare vacation spot in Waikiki.
Our focus is who this person might have sat down with, had conversation with. Those are the kind of things that we're looking for.
Health officials are concerned because they don't know where the man caught the virus since he had not been to China. Another investigation as the World Health Organization encourages global cooperation.
The greatest enemy we face is not the virus itself. It's the stigma that turns us against each other.
The organization sounding the alarm, saying experts just don't know what direction the epidemic will take next. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
A truce between the United States and the Taliban could lead to the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. U.S. Defense Secretary Marc detailed the plan at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. He says a 7-day reduction in violence agreement is now in the works.
It's my view as well that we have to give peace a chance, that the best, if not only way forward in Afghanistan is through a political agreement. And that means taking some risk. That means enabling our diplomats.
The next step involves signing the agreement. It's expected to be formally announced tomorrow, and the reduction in violence could begin as early as Monday. The plan could lead to ending America's longest-running war. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan in late 2001, shortly after the September 11th attacks. At least 2 people are dead in England as another fierce storm bears down on the United Kingdom. Hurricane winds and massive waves are roaring across the North Atlantic, where Storm Dennis has landed. Britain's army has been deployed to help shore up defenses. Hundreds of flights and trains have been canceled. At least 60 flood warnings have been issued throughout the UK. Last weekend, Storm Kira wreaked havoc and killed at least 7 people. Coming up, are protesters ramping up action against the Trans Mountain Pipeline? The cross-country protests against the LNG pipeline in BC have caught the eye of the company behind another major Canadian pipeline project. Construction on the federally owned Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion is now underway, and there are concerns there may be acts of civil disobedience. Heather Yerkes-West reports.
After years of delay, pipe for the Trans Mountain expansion project is finally going in the ground. Construction began just outside Edmonton before Christmas, with plans to continue building west towards Burnaby, BC over the next 3 years.
Our scheduling would have a modest inclusion for direct opposition that may present itself as at a work site. We see it from time to time in Burnaby, where protest activity might slow down access into the site, so we account for that.
But that modest inclusion came before protests against another Canadian pipeline project caught fire. Support for those protesting Coastal GasLink's LNG pipeline in northern BC has spread into protests and blockades across the country.
I think this is a dress rehearsal for illegal protests on pretty much any major project.
This week, Alberta's Premier denounced the protests, calling on the federal government to take a harder line against the action to ensure future resource projects are able to move ahead without interference.
I think it's about time that our police services demonstrated that this is a country that respects the rule of law.
But the situation is delicate. This political analyst believes how the LNG protests are handled now will set the stage for what's to come.
Both the police response, but also the Indigenous response, the environmental response. You know, if this really blows up, then that could easily happen again in Trans Mountain, because that's a much more contentious item, as I said, in much larger population area.
Anti-pipeline activists have said they are planning acts of civil disobedience along the TMX construction route. Trans Mountain says it's prepared if that happens.
We do have a standing injunction in British Columbia that we're prepared to execute against with authorities should activity prevent us from working in a material way.
Meaning both sides could be in for a long road ahead. Heather Urix West, Global News, Calgary.
The future of New Brunswick's minority government remains uncertain after the resignation of its deputy premier yesterday. Robert Gauvin is quitting the Conservative Party in protest over health care reforms. The controversy stems from a move that would see emergency rooms at 6 community hospitals closed during overnight hours.
Well, the reason why is because I don't believe in what we're doing. I do not believe. And I think there's an opportunity for North and South to work together.
Gauvin will now sit as an independent MLA. His resignation leaves the minority Tory government on shaky ground. The opposition Greens and Liberals are ready to defeat the government on a confidence motion. Phone fraud still ahead, the big breach that starts with your cell number.
You're watching Global National.
It's been quite the fight for one Ontario woman who recently had her phone number hijacked. Fraudsters abducted her digits and transferred them to another carrier, gaining access to everything on her smartphone. It's called unauthorized porting. Seán O'Shea looks into what the major telecom companies are doing to protect consumers.
You've got the fraudster basically on the other end of the computer line.
Yes, which is just, it's the creepiest, feeling that someone is in my personal items.
Carolyn Morgan had her phone number hijacked, and thieves used it to work their way into her email and steal from her credit card.
This charge for, I believe it was 700 and something Canadian dollars. And I said, no, that's not me.
It all happened in January, right after she got this late-night text message from her phone provider, Rogers. It wanted her to confirm she was porting her number to another wireless carrier. Porting is the term used to describe a wireless carrier moving your phone number from one company to another, typically after a customer decides to change phone companies but wants to keep the number.
What do you remember thinking when that text came across?
Right, I read it twice and then I went, oh my gosh.
Morgan says she called Rogers immediately. She says she sat on hold 24 minutes.
That's exactly what happened at the 24-minute mark, and that's when I realized, oh, there's no phone service.
She then reported the problem through a chat line to Rogers, but it took 20 hours for the phone number to be restored. Meantime, the hijack of her phone number used to authenticate bank and email accounts had been breached.
In no way would have Rogers been complicit.
A Rogers customer service manager explained Rogers wasn't to blame and wasn't responsible.
What are you doing for me as your customer in this case?
No, because unfortunately we don't compensate any type of law.
A spokesperson told us we take protecting our customers' personal information very seriously, and as fraudsters evolve their tactics, we work with other carriers to continually strengthen processes to prevent unauthorized porting. Morgan and other victims say they wish the phone carriers would be more careful.
They literally handed the fraudsters or the criminals the keys to the kingdom by not double, triple checking, not having any reinforcement in place to make sure I'm the person who actually requested the port.
Seán O'Shea, Global News, Toronto.
Okay, Bloomberg, the boomer strategy to win younger votes. That's next. With less than 9 months to go until the 2020 U.S. election, there's no clear frontrunner in the Democratic primary race. But there is a newcomer vying for the White House. Unlike many candidates who have been campaigning for more than a year, this candidate is using his deep pockets to go viral in the hopes of winning votes. Reggie Cicchini explains.
Hey, big spender!
In politics, money is power.
But in 2020, that influence doesn't just come from a checkbook, it comes from the most important currency on social media, the hashtag. And in a presidential election, the trend is to avoid viruses from kisses and handshakes and now embrace the ability to simply go viral.
Candidates need to be in a place where they know they can reach potential voters.
Billionaire Michael Bloomberg is shaking up the campaign, taking a page from the book of Donald Trump.
Problem solver. Mike Bloomberg will raise
using deep pockets and a small screen to lure in a lucrative crowd.
They're trying to find their place, and if that candidate, whomever it is, finds a way to get to them and they understand that message, that it's not pandering, it'll work.
To speak to a younger audience, the 78-year-old has to think like one. So cue the influencers. Bloomberg hired the biggest names in the meme business to plaster the pages of heavily followed social media accounts. Now, if you're not sure what a meme is, maybe get Karen to explain it to you. But don't get overly emotional if you don't understand. These memes, however, made Bloomberg look out of touch, joking about how to make him look more in touch. And that could backfire with the group that coined a certain meme.
In politics, there are plenty of people that don't understand how to use social media if they run the risk of using it the wrong way and alienating a whole group.
How these candidates approach social media is also important. Elizabeth Warren earned her likes by spending hundreds of hours taking selfies. Michael Bloomberg, well, so far he's spent more than $300 million of his own cash, most of it to make it impossible to flip through channels without seeing his name.
I've taken over all 78 channels, and you won't see any of your favourite shows again until you give in.
Now, he's paying even more to put his campaign in the palms of people's hands. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
And that is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is the ceremony in Vancouver honoring National Flag Day. 55 years ago, the red and white maple leaf emblem became our country's national flag. And today, it's a powerful and cherished symbol recognized around the world. Thank you for watching. Good night.